Kia ora tātou. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou I tae mai whakarongo ngā kōrero I tēnei ata mō te tari Kaeo. Nō reira, kia ora tātou. We have a guest with us today, e tātou mā. Tēnā koe Murray. Kia ora, how are you?
Kia ora Bryce. I'm very good, thank you.
Very pleased to have you join us here in our discussion today. A very significant topic, in my opinion, Murray, to share with everybody, because it's a relevant question and a question that needs to be unpacked and dived into, and get some clarity around the myth, I'll call it, of the kupu Pakeha, if I can say it like that. So in saying that, it really is good having you here with us today. Kia ora, Murray.
Yeah, kia ora Bryce. So this morning I've been reviewing some of your videos, and one of them is titled Unpacking Pakeha, and in that you answered some questions around the origins of the term, around the sequences of Pakeha being described, arriving here as immigrants and being described as settlers, and in turn the children of the settlers with their afterbirth or pitau established on this land, they were then called tangata whenua Pakeha, to describe, as I understand it, sort of their origins, and that the tupuna, the Maori of the day, gave this term to them so that they had a place in a new land, and that this was such a unique thing to do in throughout the world, and I might say even throughout the universe. But I would like you, if you could, to sort of unpack that word Pakeha in a separate discussion. You've described as having the word having two parts, a pa and a keha, and I understand the keha part to some degree in terms of the white spirit, shall we say. But I would enjoy if you could unpack that kupu, that word Pakeha, to a greater degree this morning, please, Bryce.
Tēnā koe Murray. Yes, I thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to start by saying that, and the reason why I'd like to say that is because it acknowledges, and I'm going to call him my ancestor. My grandfather's name was William Aldrich, and he was from Ireland. And because of that contemporary mixing of toto, or blood, if I can say, to begin with, and I really do appreciate that, because the contemporary conversations I've heard regarding Pakeha, and in some cases quite derogatory and quite racist, if I can say it like that. And when I heard those conversations, Murray, I thought of my grandfather, and I started to think to myself, you know, these comments are actually targeting him, and targeting my father, and targeting me. And it didn't sit well for some time. So I'm truly appreciative that this opportunity has come, because when the elders that I was brought up under, and I'll say it like that, they never ever spoken that way about Pakeha. When they met Pakeha, there was a union of similarity, as if they were meeting another member from another tribe. That same respect was given when meeting Pakeha. If I can, I used to do a little bit of caregiving of an elderly Pakeha man, and he was in his mid-90s. I used to pick him up once a week, carry him, put him in the car, take him for a drive around a familiar place that he knew, buy ice creams on a Sunday, And he used to talk about the relationship when he was a boy between Pakeha and Māori. And the things he used to talk about, Murray, was, you know, when a storm came through the valley, on one example, and the the tool shed blew over in the wind. By the end of that day, Māori and Pakeha were there rebuilding that shed for whoever it was. In most cases, it was a Pakeha that had that shed. But he said the reason why the shed was built, because there was a tractor in it. And every year, Māori used to come and borrow the tractor. The farmer actually, this Pakeha farmer, actually purchased a specific tractor so Māori could buy it to plow a garden to feed the whole valley. So these were the relationships that were amicable between the knowledge, or the sacred knowledge, I'll call it, of what Pakeha meant to them in that true understanding of tikanga and where it came from. So I just wanted to share that, because that's where we used to be from this man's point of view. And he did say that the downfall of Māori simply happened because of the Watties canning factory. He said, this is what he said, and I'll quote him, Murray. He said, you know what buggered you Maoris up? And I said, no, you tell me. And he said, the Watties canning factory, because it stopped you gardening. And it stopped, and it stopped you borrowing the tractor. And it stopped you doing all these things that benefited all of us. And I'll never, ever forget that conversation that he had with me as we used to drive around the different harbors and different bays and allow him to enjoy the last parts of or the twilight of his life. And he used to talk about that, because I was clearly a Māori, you know, picking up this elderly Pakeha man from out of his wheelchair, loading him into the car, walking into a shop, and, you know, there were strange looks, Murray.
Yes, yes.
There were strange looks of, and we'd pull up at a beach. I'd like to hop out and sit on the park bench if I can, Bryce. And I go, yeah, sure. And I pull him out, and there were strange looks. Oh, what's going on here? And sometimes those strange looks are still existent today. But I had no problem doing it. I was actually quite proud of the fact that I was in the presence of an elderly Pakeha kaumātua that appreciated my presence around him. And he talked about my ancestors and the way they behaved and how he missed it. So what I'd like to try to do, Murray, in this kupu Pakeha, I'd like to give it the relevance that it deserves, if I can say it like that. And first and foremost, I'd gone to the document called He Wakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga, because the kupu Pakeha appears in there. And for that kupu Pakeha to appear in this significant document of 1835, back then, gives in the research a very clear indication of the sacredness of that kupu and the sacredness of those people and how my ancestors saw Pakeha. Because if I can, just to be a little bit unorthodox, when we came here, and I'll say this for the sake of explanation, or I came here, my ancestors on the waka called Mātātua, Murray, I could have been called a Pakeha. But because of the colour of skin, we were foreigners, and there were people here. And the original name, and I'll begin with that before I go to Pakeha, the original name of the people that lived here were always consistently called tangata whenua, or as an explanation, people of the land. And from the migrations, we began as foreigners. We begin with a significant name through intermarriage, and then we always conclude with the status tangata whenua, people of the land. Now, during those sequences of becoming tangata whenua, there's certain attributes that are absorbed, and I'll call it that, okay? Meaning, at some point in time, Murray, you've got to try rotten corn. It really is lovely. That will take you closer to being tangata whenua, okay? Because you don't want to be tangata whenua Pakeha all your life, I assure you, you get to enjoy those pleasures. You know what I mean? And I'm sure you've tried the kina and fry bread. Well, that's getting you closer to be.
Oh yeah. No,
Yeah.
if I could interrupt for just one moment, just like last weekend ago, Marie and I met a truck driver at a cafeteria, and she was on her way home to Tokoroa, and she talked to, and I asked her about rotten corn, and she told me the recipe for rotten corn. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Oh, nice one. I'm good. Oh, well, you're making your way there. So, Murray, in the 1835 document, specifically called Te Tuawha, and that's Article 4, the last article of He Wakaputanga or Te Tiratanga. Halfway through the article, it uses a phrase, and I'll read it in Te Reo first. Anō te mea ka atawhai mātou ka tiaki I ngā Pakeha. That kupu I, the third kupu from the end, I, is
Yes.
about future tense. Future tense. Okay? Right?
Yes.
Now, that kupu Pakeha is included in that phrase. The other two, so what I want to do now is I want to look at a responsibility of what that phrase has just said. And I'll read the explanation in English that the elders put there. And that we will foster and watch over Pakeha. Right? Now, I want to go to the third English explanation. It says we. Now, I want to unpack that word. Who do they mean by we? In te reo of that phrase, Murray, anō te mea ka atawhai mātou. Mātou are we. So what I'd like to do, just to get a very, very clear understanding on who was going to be doing this action of the two kupu, atawhai and tiaki. And we're going to get to those two words in a minute. We have to try to understand, what does that mean, atawhai and tiaki? But when you go to the mātou, who is it that applies the atawhai and the tiaki to Pakeha? So in Article 1, Te Tuatahi, Murray, it says, ko mātou, ko ngā tino rangatira. They are the we that do the atawhai and the tiaki.
Ko mātou.
Ko mātou. I'll say it.
That's the we.
That's the we. It's the highest level of status in Aotearoa right now. They are a group of people called Te Wakameninga. Right? So what I'm saying here, it wasn't just anybody saying, it wasn't just one hapu, it wasn't another hapu, it was the whole tangata whenua status. Right? It was Te Wakameninga that said, we will atawhai and manak and tiaki Pakeha. You understand? It wasn't,
Yes.
it wasn't just the northern tribes and or the southern tribes or this or that. It was Te Wakameninga that said it. The highest status of the highest political status in Aotearoa, in the Pacific, in the Moana Nui a Kiwa, right here, right now, today. You understand? That's where that action, it comes from. So those who claim to have Wakameninga status have clearly, in my opinion, because of the, what did I call it before? Because of the way they treated my grandfather, have neglected their responsibility to care for and help my grandfather, right? And my father, and including me. And I'm going to take that responsibility because I'm part Irish. So that makes me part Pakeha. And for my grandfather to be criticized with some of the contemporary explanations of the word Pakeha, I won't accept. I will not accept from a lesser status meaning an individual with a huge imagination. If you didn't notice, Murray, I was a little bit grumpy there because I'm defending my grandfather.
Yes, as you would.
And I'll throw a little bit of salt on that wound I've just created, who married and begat my father with my full-blooded grandmother, Māori. My grandmother wasn't tangata whenua Māori. My grandmother was tangata whenua.
Oh, wow.
She was born tangata whenua.
Yeah.
Right? There's no cross-contamination there with the outside world. Okay, so that I just wanted to mention that. So it's with her bloodline I apply my grumpy.
Is that using the best of both worlds?
Yes, using the best of both worlds. So what I'd like to do now that we've identified the significance of the kupu Pakeha and that our tupuna put it into the 1835 document, and that we made a promise. Anō te mea ka pai mātou ka tiaki I ngā Pakeha. That's a promise, Murray, that my tupuna made. And if I am going to apply a wakaminenga status to myself, then I must adopt and carry that promise out and carry it through. Okay, and I will do that because it's only one part of the promise that was made. Now, the next discussion I'd like to share to expose more the significance of the creation of that word Pakeha is they talk about, in English explanation, foster or atawhai. Atawhai is a very caring word. Murray, let's just for the sake again of explanation, to atawhai someone, right, or in this case Pakeha, would be an emotion similarly to caring for someone who is unwell. That kind of emotion. Consistent love, because we know love heals all and time heals all. So if we throw those two components of time and love, Murray, what I'm trying to do here in that kupu atawhai is expose the emotion, right, of atawhai. Similarly to aroha, to guide, to nurture, to care for someone that is unwell. And I'm not saying that they're saying Pakeha were unwell, but it's in a way to familiarize Pakeha with our culture, with the culture that they've chosen to be part of, and using that emotion. Right, Murray, is that okay as an explanation?
Yeah, no, it does. It does give a, it has the sense of the sort of a senior partner looking after somebody or bringing somebody on, perhaps.
Yes, yes. Now, we'll leave that atawhai kupu for now. Now, let's go to the other promise that was made in 1835. And that kupu is tiaki, right?
Tiaki, yeah.
I ngā Pakeha. Now, tiaki is as significant as atawhai, but it has a slightly different emotion, right? So I'll cast my mind back to a hui here in the Kaeo office many, many moons ago. And the young people came in, and what they were talking about the Ministry of Fisheries and the customary fishing permits. And the permit writer that was authorized by the government under the fisheries to authorize permits for customary fishing was called a tangata kaitiaki. So the young people came in and said, what is a tangata kaitiaki? Right? And the elders on occasions, Murray, and in particular this occasion, they said this discussion should be held on a marae. So by that, this was a Wednesday meeting. On the Saturday, the very next Saturday, a marae was put together, and that kupu kaitiaki was taken to the marae. And it went into some typically cultural processes of getting down and peeling off the layers of, the first layer was the issue that was brought into the hui, tangata kaitiaki, Ministry of Fisheries, someone authorized to write customary permits for gathering of kaimoana for hui or tangi. And the young people here saying, who the heck are the Ministry of Fisheries? Who do these kaitiaki think they are? So what the elders did, they unpacked the word kaitiaki, Murray, and it was a recorded discussion. I recorded it on video. I had to, because they asked me to. You need to record this. So there were about 40 elders there from right throughout Ngāpui. Most of them were from Whangaroa. We were out of Waimahana, if I can say it like that. One of our elders said, come out to my marae, right on the coast. How appropriate, Murray, you're sitting in this marae and you can hear the waves crashing on the beach. So, and because we were talking about Tangaro or the ocean. And these are some of the other compliances or sacred practices that the elders did. You want to talk about my land, you come to my land and talk about it. I don't want to go to a Māori land court in 150 miles away. You come, these are the kinds of standards that they had, which were all part of that sacred creation of kupu, Murray, if I can say it like that. So during the day, the hui started about 9 o'clock in the morning, Murray. We had morning tea, we had lunch, we had afternoon tea, and it even went into dinner. What I'm expressing there is the discussion went on all day. So they finally got down to the last layer of the sacred understanding of kaitiaki. And what they talked about, Murray, was the kupu kaitiaki is a new word that was brought about when contact happened, right? It was more of an action than a word that had sections and subsections and clauses and first and second and third readings in a parliament building. You know what I mean? Sorry about that. I'll carry on. So in a nutshell, the kupu tiaki was more a word that was talked about. Haere tiaki koutou, go and look after those people. So the tiaki kupu, Murray, comes from a whānau structure, right? Now, and I'll be very, very frank, because this is how they were when we got the picture of what those elders were talking about that day. And it came about by asking a question to the young people. We were sitting there listening. They didn't tell us the answer. They encouraged us to find the answer in our minds. And the question was this, Murray. I'm going to ask you a question. Yep, here's the question. After what you've heard today, who is the tiaki of your children? In the document here it says, watch over.
Yes.
Right? The answer is very clear if the discussion had been heard. Right? The tiaki of my children are me. It's the parents. Right? And that, Murray, is the emotion of tiaki, a parent guiding a child. All right? Then comes then they got back to the specific reason why we were there, the customary fishing permit holder and writer with the authority to authorize seafood gathering for hui or tangi. And then they said, who is the tiaki of the fish in the ocean? And it's the parent of the fish, or in this case, tangaro. All right? The parent. That, Murray, if that's the case, then in this 1835 document where it says, anō te mea ka atawhai mātou, ka tiaki i ngā Pakeha, right? At some point in time, Pakeha will become tiaki of their own children here in Aotearoa. You understand?
Yes, yes.
And they will apply the...
And what would, oh, sorry.
No, carry on.
But at that point, would Pakeha not have, would have earned a new status or grown into a new status, and maybe they would not have that word, that same kupu attached to them?
Exactly right. You've exactly pointed out the critical part to this, Murray. In time, Pakeha will become tangata whenua. If they aren't already, how many generations did it take for my descendants, ancestors, on the Mātātua canoe, right, to become tauiwi, and then go through the sequences of being tangata whenua Māori, and then become tangata whenua? How many generations did it take? I'm going to suggest, Murray, it doesn't take many. 3, maybe 4 at the most. Right? At the most. So if there are Pakeha here in Aotearoa that are 4, 5, 6 generations, here in Aotearoa, in my opinion, with the document and the other components of the sacred philosophy of where that kupu came from, then they become already tangata whenua. But if I
whether or not they have married into or had children with tangata whenua Māori, that
right. No, I understand. Good. I'm glad you've asked that question, because that leads to the next part of this explanation, Murray. This is a response, I'll say, to that question you've just given. From the process and the sequence, I'm going to call it the tikanga, right? And I'll use the canoe I came from. Oh, no, I won't. Oh, let's go back a little bit further than that, Murray. Let's go back to a story of Maui, the youngest child of Taranga. And Maui was the youngest child, and in one of the events he did, he pulled the land out of the sea. He went fishing with his brothers, hid under the bait bag, went out, had his grandmother's jawbone, threw it over the side. What we've got to understand just there, just in case there's some confusion that this becomes a Lord of the Rings movie, is that the jawbone of his grandmother actually hooked into a whare, a gable of a house under the ocean. So there was people living in this house under the while the Aotearoa was under the sea, right? Because the jawbone hooked under the gable of a house. It wasn't a fish that actually grabbed the jawbone as if it was bait, right? And there was a little sacred event that the Maui drew blood from himself and he put it on the jawbone, pulled it on a gable. So there were people living on this land under the water. Let's just call them tangata whenua. Then in the metaphor, the land rose above the ocean. And it said people were scurrying on the land. And you can understand the use of the word scurrying is because there was a little bit of shock or disarray, or something had happened, or they weren't prepared for it to happen. And we're talking about an ancestor, ruumoko, or we talk about the geothermal area, volcanoes, and that deity we call ruumoko. So they were tangata whenua. That's where the kupu tangata whenua came from. Those people who were scurrying on the land. Okay. Now I'm going to quietly and as sacredly and as kindly as I can put a name to those people. And they're well known right throughout Aotearoa. Everybody whakapapas to them. They're the turehu and the patupaehere. And it's understood that when they rose above to be exposed to direct sunlight had an impact on them. I'm going to use that phrase. So they went underground and they come out in the mist. They come out and expose themselves above land, and they use mist, which is water, which is where they reside, in water when the land was under the sea. And they, in Tuhoi in particular, up here in the north here, the Waipawa forest, there's remnants of those buildings, of those structures, of those people.
Yes. Okay. I've heard of them, yes.
Yes, so these remnants of that. So now, when that land came above the Patupai and the Turehu, they were the tangata whenua original. Right, Murray? And
yes,
then came this time where migration from within the Moana Nui a Kiwa happened. And we know the names, there's Waiata of the canoe that migrated to Aotearoa. And when they got here, I'm going to use this very, very clear explanation as it was given to me. When they got here, they were foreigners from another place. They were welcomed by the tangata whenua, because only tangata whenua could do that. Okay, they became tauiwi, for an example, foreigners from but living here. They intermarried. And in a very short time, they went through the sequences to become tangata whenua. Okay, Murray? Now, let's go, let's bypass all of those canoe that migrated here, and we get to a date called 1769. I'm not saying that's the only date, but that's a date where in recorded history is called contact. Okay? And that was a boat with sails on it. And that was where the word Pakeha was talked about. Because in the stories that I've been told, when they first saw a sailing boat, they saw it as a cloud floating on the ocean because of all the billowing sails, right? Let's call it of a sailing boat that had arrived from another part of the world. And these people hopped off it that were fair-skinned. Okay, and that's an indication as to what they saw initially, having never seen it before. A fair-skinned, now the fair-skinned or the ma pure color of their skin gave the impression of a spirit, right?
Yes, yes. Kaeo.
Okay, now because of their collective spirits in that collective environment, because Pakeha didn't arrive here one at a time. They arrived in groups and they put the skiff off and they came ashore. So there was a group of them. And it's being told that that's where the pa component came from, which led to more sequences of, if we go to that kupu pa, what exists on a pa site, giving tangata whenua status to these people who we knew at the time were going to intermarry with us, as my grandfather did, and become, with the sequences, Murray, tangata whenua. At the moment, there's a consideration that Pakeha are just called Pakeha. There's a sequence between Pakeha and tangata whenua, I'm going to indicate called tangata whenua Pakeha. That brings them closer to being tangata whenua and taking responsibility for the promises that were made in the 1835 document. Is that okay? It's an explanation, Murray? To start us off.
So just, is it just so the pa gives some kind of tangata whenua status to these people that sort of were sort of, you know, familiar, or they had a similarity to the Keha.
Yes.
The pa gives some sort of status.
Yes. Initially, there was a group of them. Now, when you go to that kupu pa and you go to a pa site, there's all the components of existence are there. Okay, there's water,
yes,
gardening
yes.
area. There's lots of different types of water for doing lots of different things, Murray. All the components of existence and survival, not just for that generation, but for the many generations, Murray, or the sequences to become tangata whenua. Okay, how many generations was my grandmother here from her whakapapa to a canoe that arrived here, did she become tangata whenua? And it's in a lot of the discussions, Murray, that it's not many generations that it take. Okay, but in saying that, those generational experiences through that atawhai and tiaki were a process of guiding and adopting those practices of tangata whenua. So the status tangata whenua came with a certain set of tools, a specific set of tools.
Yes.
Right. And those tools, those tools, looking after the land, looking after the river, looking after the next generation, recording the past generations, you know, if I can say it like that, the tiaki, caring for the environment.
These tools sound like they're obligations, in fact.
Well, I mean, if we want to exist here forever, or let's just say 5, 6, 10 generations, Murray, we can't leave the land and the water in the contaminated state where the generations coming can't, it'll kill them. You know what I mean? We can't. So those are some of the tools. You're exactly right, Murray. Those are some of the tools that are obligations. Yes, you're right too. Because if we go back to that tiaki, who is ultimately the mother, right? She has an obligation to care for us, and we in return have an obligation to care for her.
Yes.
That's the full tangata whenua status.
Nice. Oh, that's really, thank you. That's really good explanation from my perspective, Bryce.
Oh no, I mean, if anyone uses the derogatory contemporary phrase of Pakeha, Murray, you just send me their photo and their phone number, and even if you know where they live, and I'll send some boys around to correct the record. Sorry about it.
Oh well, I hope that one day that I'll be able to perform that duty myself, Bryce, with my knowledge.
Yes, no, I understand. Murray, I'd like to conclude this part of our discussion with a phrase that was used at a significant point in time in our tribunal process here up in Ngāpuhi, Te Paparahi o Taraki. And a question was asked by a lawyer to one of the elders during cross-examination. And it was about Pakeha, but it was also about religion. But the question was quite derogatory from the lawyer, right? And the kaumātua responded like this, which wasn't the answer that the lawyer wanted. And he simply said to the crowd, he turned to the crowd and he said, "There's only one place in this universe you'll find a pakaha." And the place went silent because waiting, where's that? And he said, "Standing next to a Māori here in Aotearoa." Pakaha are as unique as Māori. Right, and so that just settled that event. So in saying that, Murray, our clock is the time is our enemy right now. And I'd like to thank you for this part. I know there is another part that I'd like to encourage us to go through. And just a significant mihi to you for being brave enough to ask this question, Murray, that I'm more than happy to talk about further with you. So in saying that...
I look forward to that.
Yeah. Kia ora tātou.
Thanks very much, Ross. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.